Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a topic that's reshaping the world as we know it: Chinese migration in the 21st century. We've got some really interesting sources to dig into today.
It's a topic that often gets oversimplified. People think Chinatown and call it a day,
Mhm.
but it's so much more than that.
Exactly. We're talking about a complex global network, and to understand it, we've got to go beyond the stereotypes and really get into the nitty-gritty.
We need to look at the lives of these individuals, their motivations, their challenges, and their impact on the world.
And we've got some great sources to help us do just that. We've got an academic paper from 2002 that explores how Chinese migration is becoming increasingly globalized, a 2019 report that dives deep into the numbers and gives us a snapshot of the Chinese diaspora today, and to bring things right up to the present, a 2022 article that focuses specifically on new Chinese migrants in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
It's fascinating stuff. We'll see how things have changed over time, who these migrants are, where they're going, and what it all means for both China and the world.
One of the things that jumped out at me right away was this idea of a shift in how Chinese migrants are perceived. Even within China itself, there's been a pretty dramatic change.
You're right. It used to be that leaving China was almost seen as a betrayal. You were labeled a traitor for abandoning the motherland. This was especially true before the economic reforms of the late 1970s. But then Deng Xiaoping came along and really shook things up.
So the government's stance on migration basically did a complete 180. Why the sudden change of heart?
Well, as China started opening up economically, the government began to see the potential benefits of having its citizens go abroad and seek opportunities. They realized that having Chinese people succeed in other countries could actually boost China's global standing.
So they went from seeing migrants as traders to seeing them as assets. That's a pretty big shift.
It really is. And to reflect this new outlook, they even came up with a new term, Sin Yimin, which encompasses all Chinese who have emigrated since 1978, regardless of their reasons for leaving or their legal status.
So they were acknowledging that these migrants were still part of the Chinese story.
Precisely. And what's even more interesting is that this shift in perception wasn't limited to China itself. The way the West views Chinese migrants has also transformed over time.
In what way?
Scholar Adam McCune argues that we've seen a progression from viewing Chinese migrants as coolies to middleman minorities to, more recently, global entrepreneurs.
That's fascinating. So it's not just China. The whole world's view of Chinese migrants has been evolving.
Exactly. And it highlights how economic and political forces can really shape global perceptions of entire groups of people. But let's get back to the Chinese diaspora itself. How do we even begin to define who belongs? It seems like there's no easy answer.
That's a good point. It gets pretty tricky. Even the experts can't seem to agree on how many Chinese people are actually living abroad.
That's right. I mean, the United Nations estimated about 10 million Chinese-born individuals living abroad in 2017. But get this, that same year, the Overseas Community Affairs Council of Taiwan placed the number at over 42.5 million. Talk about a huge difference.
Wow, that's a massive discrepancy. Why such a wide range?
It all boils down to who they're counting. The UN focuses solely on those born in China, while Taiwan's estimate includes second and even later generations of Chinese descent. So it raises the question, are we talking about people who are born in China or people who identify with Chinese heritage? It's a pretty big question.
It is. It's not just about birthplace. It's about cultural identity and how people choose to define themselves. So we've got this vast and diverse diaspora. Where are all these people going?
Now that's where things get really interesting. Historically, Southeast Asia has been the primary destination for Chinese migrants. But in the 21st century, we're seeing much more diversity in where they're choosing to settle. North America, Oceania, Africa, and Europe are all seeing a significant increase in Chinese migration. And it's not just a one-way street from east to west anymore.
So the traditional narrative of Chinese people only moving to Western countries is becoming outdated.
You got it. We're seeing more movement in all directions. Take Eastern Europe, for example. Chinese markets and Chinese shops are popping up all over the region, often catering to rural and low-income urban populations. These migrants are finding their own niche in these new markets.
So they're adapting and finding opportunities in unexpected places.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that we're seeing a growing trend of mobility between destination countries. A migrant might move from China to Eastern Europe, then on to Western Europe, or maybe even back to China. They're constantly on the move, chasing opportunities wherever they arise.
So it's a much more dynamic picture than most people imagine. It's not just a one-way ticket, it's a constant flow back and forth. It sounds like this whole idea of a linear migration path is being completely overturned.
You could say that. The global system of Chinese migration is becoming much more fluid, and the types of people migrating are changing too. It's not just about low-skilled laborers anymore.
Right, we're seeing more skilled professionals and students migrating now.
Exactly. The traditional image of the Chinese migrant as a huagong, or low-skilled laborer, is becoming increasingly outdated. Now we're seeing a rise in huaqiao, students seeking higher education, and huashong, the entrepreneurs.
Huakio and Huashang. Okay, I'll try to remember those. But with all these highly skilled people leaving China, is there a concern about a brain drain?
There is. The Chinese government is definitely worried about that. But before we dive into that, let's shift our focus to Thailand and take a closer look at what's happening in Chiang Mai.
Sounds good. We've talked about the global trends, but now let's see how this all plays out on the ground.
It seems pretty straightforward, Chinese people moving to Thailand, but it's not always easy for these new arrivals. They faced quite a few hurdles.
Like what? What kind of hurdles?
Well, for starters, there's the obvious language barrier. Many of them don't speak Thai, which can make everyday life pretty challenging. And then there are the cultural differences.
Yeah, even though Thailand has a sizable ethnic Chinese population, I imagine the cultural landscape for these new migrants is still quite different.
Exactly. It's not the same as it was for earlier generations of Chinese immigrants who came to Thailand and really integrated into Thai society.
Mm.
These new arrivals often see themselves primarily as Chinese citizens, not Thai. They haven't necessarily gone through that same assimilation process.
So they're navigating a different social and cultural reality. It sounds tough. How are they coping with all this? Are they finding ways to connect with each other and build a sense of community?
They are. And that's where things get really interesting. The article talks about the rise of what they call parallel communities. Essentially, these are spaces where new Chinese migrants can come together and find support, a sense of belonging, almost like a little Chinatown within Chiang Mai.
Parallel communities, huh? Can you elaborate on that? What do these communities actually look like?
Think of it as a way for these migrants to create their own support networks. They're connecting with each other using platforms like WeChat or gathering in physical spaces like churches. It's all about navigating this new environment together.
So they're creating pockets of Chinese culture within Thailand. It makes sense. When you're in a new place, it's natural to gravitate towards what's familiar.
Exactly. Having that sense of familiarity, that shared language and culture can be incredibly comforting, especially when you're far from home.
Absolutely. Can you give us some concrete examples of how these parallel communities actually function? Like, how are they providing support for these migrants?
Sure. One example that stood out in the article is this WeChat group called the Studying in Thailand Consultation Group. It's a guardian-parent group started by a Chinese father who goes by the nickname Mr. Potato. Apparently, he's got a background working for a transnational computer company and speaks fluent English.
Mr. Potato, huh? That's a pretty interesting nickname.
Bah.
So what do these parents talk about in this WeChat group?
Oh, you know, everything from practical stuff like visa issues and educational choices to more complex issues like how to resolve conflicts with international schools and how to make sure their voices are heard in the community.
So it's about helping these families settle into life in Chiang Mai, both practically and in terms of finding their place in a new society.
You got it. They're sharing advice, offering support, and advocating for each other. It's a really valuable resource for these families who are far from home.
It sounds like they're playing a crucial role. Are there other examples of these parallel communities that go beyond just families?
Oh, definitely. Religion is another area where we see these communities forming. The article specifically mentions two Chinese Christian churches in Chiang Mai, the Home of Love Church and the Chiang Mai Chinese Christian Church, or CMCCC.
Both of these churches are relatively new, right? Is there a reason for that?
Well, it likely reflects the growing number of new Chinese migrants in Chiang Mai over the past decade or so. These churches seem to attract a real mix of people, students, families, business people, all looking for a sense of community.
I can see how that would be appealing, especially for those who are new to the city. It's not just about religious faith, it's about finding a place where you feel comfortable and understood.
Right, and these churches provide that. All their activities are conducted in Chinese, and they organize events and celebrations tied to Chinese holidays. It helps these migrants maintain a connection to their cultural heritage.
So it's a blend of spiritual and cultural nourishment. It makes sense that these churches would have such a broad appeal. Do they offer any other forms of support for new arrivals?
Oh, absolutely. They often go beyond just spiritual guidance.
Yeah.
They'll help with practical things like airport pickups, finding a place to live,
Okay.
maybe even offer language classes and cultural courses.
So they're really providing a holistic support system for new arrivals. It's about meeting both their spiritual and practical needs.
Exactly. It's that combination of support and familiarity that makes these churches such a draw for new Chinese migrants. And, the article highlights how different groups within this community find different things to value in these spaces. Business people might use it for networking, students for socializing, families for a sense of community and belonging.
So these churches become like microcosms of Chinese society within Chiang Mai. They cater to a whole range of needs and interests. It's fascinating.
It is, and it's not just about Christianity either. The article also mentions a Buddhist group called the Compassion Foundation, or Mailwazi, which is another interesting example.
Okay, tell me more about that. I'm intrigued.
Well, it was founded back in 2016 by a Taiwanese Buddhist monk and is financially supported by a network of both Chinese and Thai donors. What's unique about Mailwazi is that it's not your typical Buddhist temple. It's actually registered as a foreign charity and operates more like a cosmopolitan Buddhist education and charity association.
So it's trying to bridge the gap between Chinese and Thai communities through its activities.
You could say that. They offer Thai language classes for Chinese residents, along with various cultural courses. And of course, there's a spiritual aspect as well, with chanting and meditation. The article even mentions that they purchased land for a new meditation center, so it seems like they have some serious financial resources and are really committed to their mission.
It's amazing to see how these parallel communities, the guardian parent groups, the churches, Miawezi, are all providing such crucial support for these new Chinese migrants. It seems like they're really helping them adjust to their new lives and find a sense of belonging in Chiang Mai.
They definitely are. These spaces are vital for helping these individuals navigate the challenges of living in a new country. But even with all this support, there's still this underlying tension between finding that support and actually integrating into Thai society as a whole.
Right. If they're spending most of their time within these parallel communities, are they missing out on opportunities to connect with Thai people and really become a part of the larger community?
That's a great point, and it's a concern that the article raises as well. There's a real worry that these communities, while offering support, could actually lead to greater social division between new Chinese migrants and Thai locals.
So how do you find that balance? How do you make sure these communities act as bridges to the wider society rather than becoming isolated islands?
That's the million-dollar question. It's something researchers and policymakers are really grappling with. The article suggests promoting cultural education and creating more opportunities for meaningful interaction between new Chinese migrants and Thai locals.
It seems like finding ways to connect these parallel communities to the larger Thai community is key. It could make a huge difference in creating a more inclusive and harmonious society for everyone.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the strengths of these communities while also encouraging more interaction and understanding between different cultural groups. It's a challenge, but it's definitely a worthy goal to strive for.
I agree. It's about recognizing the value of diversity and finding ways to make it work for everyone. So we've seen how this dynamic plays out in Thailand, but what about the bigger picture? What are the broader implications of all this?
All right.
How is this whole evolving landscape of Chinese migration with its complex patterns, diverse motivations, and these parallel communities shaping the world as we know it?
That's a big question. And to really understand those implications, I think we need to circle back to China itself. We need to see how the country is being impacted by all these global flows of people.
Okay, let's shift our focus back to China. What are some of the key implications for the so-called homeland? We were just talking about the brain drain and how it's a concern for China. Can you remind us what that means in this context?
Basically, it's the fear that a lot of highly skilled and educated individuals, people that China has invested a ton of resources in, are choosing to leave and go to other countries, places that might have better opportunities or a higher quality of life.
So China's pouring all this money into education, and then some of its brightest minds are heading for greener pastures. I can see why that would be a worry, but is there any evidence to suggest this brain drain is actually happening?
Oh, it's definitely happening. The 2019 report actually highlights that China has seen a pretty significant outflow of talent in recent years. And it's not just about the numbers, it's about losing expertise in crucial areas, the kind of expertise that drives innovation and could really help China move forward.
So is China just letting this happen, or are they trying to do something about it?
Oh, they're not just sitting back and watching it happen. They've actually implemented a number of initiatives specifically aimed at attracting these highly skilled professionals back to the mainland. Think of it as a reverse brain drain.
So they're trying to lure back the ones who've already left. What are some of the strategies they're using?
Well, one of the most well-known initiatives is the Thousand Talents program. It offers all sorts of incentives to entice talented individuals to return, things like research funding, housing subsidies, even guaranteed jobs. It's a pretty attractive package.
Yeah, it sounds like they're really pulling out all the stops to get these sea turtles, as they're sometimes called, to come back to China.
Exactly. Sea turtles, that's a good one. It really captures the idea of these individuals returning to their homeland after spending some time abroad.
But do you think these incentives are going to be enough? I mean, there are often deeper reasons why people choose to migrate. Things like quality of life, political freedom, access to world-class research facilities. Those are all factors that China might need to address if they really want to reverse this brain drain.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about money. It's about creating an environment that's truly attractive to top talent.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions. China really needs to find a way to strike that balance, to make the country a place where talented individuals want to stay and contribute.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that not all Chinese migrants are settling permanently abroad. Some are engaging in what we call circular migration. They're moving back and forth between China and other countries throughout their lives.
Right, we touched on that earlier. Can you remind us what that looks like in practice?
Sure, it might involve going abroad to study, then maybe gaining some work experience in a global setting, and then eventually returning to China with all those new skills, knowledge, and connections. It's not a permanent goodbye. It's more of a see you later.
So they're bringing back valuable experience that can benefit China. It seems like this kind of circular migration could actually be a good thing for the country in the long run.
It definitely can be. These returnees, with their international experience and expertise, can play a big role in boosting China's economic and technological development. It's a win-win situation.
It's fascinating. It seems like migration presents both challenges and opportunities for China. They need to find ways to manage these flows effectively, to minimize the negative impacts of the brain drain while maximizing the positive aspects of circular migration.
It's all about finding that right balance. And as China's influence on the world stage continues to grow, it's likely to have an even bigger impact on global migration patterns, not just for Chinese citizens, but for everyone.
It really makes you wonder what the future holds. Will we see more circular migration? Will China succeed in luring back its talent? And how will these parallel communities we talked about evolve? It's definitely a story worth following.
It is. Chinese migration is a dynamic and ever-changing phenomenon that's going to continue shaping the world for years to come.
It's been a truly eye-opening experience exploring this topic with you. We've gone from broad historical trends and global patterns to the very personal experiences of these new Chinese migrants in Chiang Mai.
It's been a great discussion.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways is that Chinese migration is just so much more complex than we often realize. It's not just about statistics and numbers. It's about individual stories, diverse motivations, and the interplay of economics, politics, and culture.
Well said. It's about understanding the human stories behind the headlines.
As we wrap up this deep dive, is there any final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd ask everyone to consider the long-term implications of these parallel communities we've been discussing. What do they mean for the future of the Chinese diaspora? And how will they impact the societies where these migrants are settling? Will they ultimately lead to greater integration, or will they create further division? These are important questions to think about as we continue to observe how Chinese migration unfolds in the 21st century.
That's a really thought-provoking question to end on. It's clear that these parallel communities are playing a crucial role right now, and it'll be fascinating to see how they evolve and what impact they have on both the migrants and the societies they're becoming a part of. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of globalizing Chinese migration. It's been a truly enlightening journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we'll continue to keep you informed as this story continues to unfold. Until next time.